Welcome back, and thank you for sticking through those commercial breaks. I'm very excited to introduce our guest for today is Professor Korok Ray, who is the director over at the Mays Innovative Research Center at Texas A&M, who is an economist there as well. Professor Ray, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. In your own words, how would you describe yourself?
Thank you, Q. Thank you for having me. It's great to see you again after all these years. It's your hair's gotten a little longer from back in college, but it's you're still looking good. So I am a professor here at Texas A&M in College Station. I am essentially an economist who has studied game theory my whole life. That's my academic vintage. And I also am interested in technology. I run an innovation center. I'm the research director for the Mays Innovation Research Center, which I founded 5 years ago here at Texas A&M. And we do a lot on Bitcoin. It's probably our biggest area of research. We host an annual conference. We have several panel discussions per year. I'm the faculty advisor for our student Bitcoin club. And we have a Bitcoin lab where we do a lot of mining and education on Bitcoin. So there's a lot that we do around Bitcoin because it is, in my opinion, the greatest innovation of our time. And that's what my center is dedicated to studying innovation.
Well, it's wonderful to meet you. I'm so excited to meet someone from Q's past who can regale us with stories of his just atrocious academic performance. I love the idea. You said like there's a Bitcoin lab. I love that idea. Like there's like a bunch of college students who are like tinkering, learning how that works. You said that there's mining happening there. What other kinds of exercises or what other kinds of things are people exploring in that lab? And what does it look like? Like paint us a word picture. Are there like wires hanging everywhere?
Yeah. Actually, so the lab is actually it's an off-campus lab that I founded last year, and it essentially is a space for students to innovate and experiment. It's hosting several student clubs that I advise. Robotics, Bitcoin are the big main ones. And I think one thing I wanted to do is to give people a space to at least have some content with the genesis of Bitcoin and where the ideas came from. So we have on the wall photos of 12 cypherpunks that were elemental in the genesis of Bitcoin and some of the ideas that led to Bitcoin. We also have a nice graphic of sort of the 50 ideas or so that kind of led into Bitcoin over a long history. So people get a sense that this is not just some dating app that a college dropout made, but it's actually real deep technology. And so I wanted to convey that. So the walls are kind of displaying all of these different historical foundations of Bitcoin. And then we have several mining rigs that have been donated to us. Some are working, some are actually broken, where the kids can tinker with them and kind of look at them inside. We have several S9s that are running. And so it's a great space for students to have some physical contact with Bitcoin. You know, it's an abstract concept. It's an abstract. Bitcoin is hard stuff. And I think it's important for kids, especially young kids, both students as well as in our community, to get a knowledge of what this really is. And so it's a nice little play space that I hope one day there will be Bitcoin museums around the world somewhere where people can really kind of get a sense of what it is and how it works.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
What happens to the Bitcoin that you guys successfully mine there?
So it stays in the endowment for the lab. So we will right now we haven't sold any of it. It's a small operation. The miners are basically there's 3 of them really that are working. 2 of them broke down. They're basically just S9s, which now is getting old technology, and they're essentially breaking even. I mean, energy is cheap in Texas, but the residential market is still pretty expensive. So we're essentially paying for the cost of power. It's covering the cost of power. And then over time, we hope we can use it to fund activities for the students.
That's so cool.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Can we talk a little bit? I know that you also sort of put together a Bitcoin conference down at A&M and Texas seems to be a growing hub for just Bitcoin mining in this country. Do you
Right.
talk about how that sort of come to be and what you're seeing transpire down there?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's really exciting what's happening here in Texas. So what happened was let me address the first question about the conference. I was the organizer of this Bitcoin conference 2 years ago, which was our first Bitcoin conference, and I would say it was it was similar to kind of like a G-rated version of Bitcoin Miami. So it was similar in style. We had panel discussions, a lot of famous people talking, mostly from finance, actually, on Friday. So we had 2 days. The first day was big name speakers like Michael Saylor and Ray Dalio offering their opinions on Bitcoin, which was over Zoom. We had 2,000 people online watching. And then on Saturday, the next day, we did a full day face to face. It was during the pandemic, so this was actually pretty unusual to have a face to face conference during the pandemic, where we had a lot of the people in the Bitcoin space, Bitcoin entrepreneurs, like Corey Klippstein, for example, and Jesse Powell. So a lot of different people involved in mining and in Bitcoin exchanges. Some Bitcoin investment firms, they would be talking about their Bitcoin businesses on Saturday. So that was a big success. It was a ton of work, honestly, but it was fun. I did meet a lot of people. And this year, we had a second kind of conference. It was different. It was a little more academic. And this was where I sent a call for papers out for faculty to write papers on Bitcoin. And I wasn't sure who was going to submit a paper, but we got, we had over 100 submissions, and we picked, I picked essentially 8 papers to present that the faculty would present from around the world, as far away as France. They flew in for 2 days, and they presented their research. And the goal of that is to help build out the academic pipeline of research in Bitcoin, so that in the long term, universities can get on board and treat this as a legitimate discipline. And so that was another success. This year, I think we'll do something different. Hopefully, something for developers. We're still working out what that'll look like. Texas is booming in Bitcoin. It is Bitcoin country for many reasons. I would say first, there's a huge amount of the developers that have located to Austin, partly because of the exodus during the pandemic from California, from the we like to say the People's Republic of California, moving to Austin. And the second thing, probably even bigger than that, is the migration of the miners into Texas, both domestically and from China. So after China cracked down on the miners, many of those miners, some of whom I've met, have moved their businesses to parts of Texas where, relative in the U.S., it's still very crypto friendly, and the energy is cheap. And so a lot of these miners have moved here. An example is in Rockdale, which is about an hour from College Station and about an hour from Austin, right in between us, has some of the largest Bitcoin mines in the world, and they've really perfected immersion cooling and other really advanced techniques with Bitcoin mining. Right now, I think the estimate's around 10% of worldwide hash power is in Texas, and that's probably going to grow as long as China doesn't change their rules, which they don't look like they are. Will probably grow up to 20% in the next decade, even 25%. So the Bitcoin meetups in Texas are a big deal. People travel from all over to them. The Austin one is a developer meetup. The Houston one is really a mining meetup, and Fort Worth is just getting started too. So it's a really great place for Bitcoin. I think it aligns well for several reasons. It's sort of on the right side of our philosophical and political beliefs, as well as the legacy oil and gas infrastructure is actually extremely relevant for Bitcoin, both because of the mining facilities and the human capital, the skills and the talent needed to run a Bitcoin mine are very similar to what's needed in successful oil and gas.
I want to talk a little bit about just, we've talked P&I about the game theory happening in real time. First, domestically speaking, we have states like Texas who've been on the forefront of bringing miners in, and setting up regulations that help them set up in ways that achieve success. And then you have states like New York who go out of their way to make legislation that doesn't even make sense to any of their own legislators, but then just curbs development in that state. Do you like, how do you see the game theory of these playing out domestically? Will there just be a more polarizing effect where some states just won't even bother touching it, or will everyone be eventually forced to have some sort of exposure to Bitcoin and mining in particular?
Yeah, so let me first answer that at the international level before I get to the domestic. At the international level, between the U.S. and China, actually, I think what China did to crack down on the miners, while it was sort of, in my opinion, so the wrong decision from them, there's a lot of hydropower that they're now not able to capture because of that. In some level, it was the right decision for the U.S. because when China moves left, the U.S. wants to move right, and it would be sort of it actually plants a flag that because the U.S. seeks to define itself in some level in opposition to China, the fact that they oppose Bitcoin mining is actually good for the general political sentiment here in the U.S. Now, that said, I'm a big fan of regulatory competition among states for what the best regulation is. This is in the history of economics, this has been proven to be a great way to discover what the right level of regulation is. So I'm a big fan of allowing states like Wyoming and Texas, which are being very Bitcoin friendly at the moment, and to put some political pressure on states like New York, especially as these Bitcoin mining operations can eventually generate a lot of benefits to the local economies, which is already happening here in Texas. So I hope New York and some of the other coastal cities and states will recognize some of the benefits that they need to get on board with Bitcoin. Here in Texas, there's it's a little more complicated in Texas for several reasons because the grid is unique to Texas, and we have some issues that we need to sort out. We're in the midst of doing that, but I think overall it has been very beneficial for the state economy, and I'm almost sure that would be the case across different states as well.
When you have conversations with the miners that are in Texas, what are certain things that they want more of or even less of? Like, what is it they are looking for from legislators in the state?
Yeah, I think the miners are actually very, very. I'm actually surprised, to be totally frank. I'm a rational economist who believes that people do and should act extremely rationally, and I think maybe they are acting rationally in the long term. But they're very, very cooperative with the state in terms of communicating what they need and how they are going to go about it. The main issue with the miners in Texas is should they turn off during times of peak demand? And that happens, for example, the summers and the winters during these extreme weathers here in Texas when there's a lot of use for electricity. And it turned out essentially in this last heat wave we had sort of a month or two ago, that many of the miners turned off their mining rigs and essentially balanced out the grid in Texas. And so I think what they're mostly looking for is some clarity and visibility from the state on what will be the right incentives for them to turn off and at what the right time is. Now, the price of electricity in a full free market should communicate most of that. It's a little more complicated because you have with Texas we've got our own grid separate from the rest of the country, and we want to make sure we don't break it essentially. So what's happening in Texas is the Texas Blockchain Council is a nonprofit based out of Dallas. They're essentially coordinating a lot of the different miners, the big miners in Texas, to make sure that they can turn off at the right times so that the grid itself is not harmed, and turn on at the right times also to provide more balance over those times of peak off peak times. And the reason this helps the grid is because, absent Bitcoin mining, the energy it fluctuates a lot, and the mining operations can essentially reduce the volatility of the usage, which will be better for the grid as a whole. And so that's some of the logic for why it makes economic sense to do this. And the Blockchain Council has been very, very productive and very successful in doing that. I would recommend, if you really want further insights into that, I can put you in touch with the people there who work on that full time.
No, totally. I mean, I'm just curious more your thoughts on this. And this is a question from the chat, but obviously we're talking about letting the market sort of dictate when and where the energy is getting distributed. The Bitcoin miners tend to just have the money to pay for it. Why should they have to shut down, other than, of course, to let people survive? Beyond the humanity aspect of it, is there an economic incentive there that's driving these energy companies to want to expand the grid exponentially greater, far greater than what the capacity is required today, rather than leave it sort of within a range that will only get to peak energy usage during times like a heat wave that we saw a few weeks ago now?
Yeah, I think if the market was completely free and the price could be anything you want, you would not need any intervention from anyone, from the government or from TBC or so on, and the price could do all of the communication of behavior for the relevant parties. And so, when prices go up, that's usually even though that seems like it's bad for consumers, it's good for the supply side of the market because it brings more supply online, similar to surge pricing with Uber. The problem with electricity is that it's not because it's a regulated industry. You can't just have these prices completely unlimited. Well, I would think you could. Personally and politically, I think you should let the price be fully flexible. But in reality, I think there's a little bit of a political desire to constrain that band of allowable prices, especially on the upside. And also, there may be technological barriers for how much capacity the grid can bear at any given time. And so for us in Texas, like with the Texas freeze last winter, I think if the price was allowed to be totally free, people would have rationally underconsumed and reduced their demand for electricity during the freeze. But because it wasn't, what happened is we became very close to breaking the grid. And so I think it was a few minutes away from actually shutting down and doing some permanent damage to the energy pipeline. So because we don't allow for full free pricing, that's the reason why we have these other mechanisms, like the state having to negotiate with the Bitcoin miners, either directly or through nonprofit entities like the Blockchain Council.
I think that's such an important point there, that because we don't have a free market in these spaces, that directly led, or rather indirectly led, to the situation we had in Texas, where basically the grid almost, went up in smoke and fire and lightning,
right.
And there were crazy lights everywhere. It would have been like a firework factory exploding. That's what it's like in my head.
Don't forget the Ted Cruz in Cancun. Never,
of course,
we'll never forget.
100%.
Right.
I just feel like anytime that you have these over-regulated, people like to think that we live in a free and open market. That seems to be like a major tenet of the kind of the American dream. And the reality is there's almost nothing there's almost no markets that we as individuals participate in this country that are not artificially being manipulated one way or another. And I think that that is a truth that is hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around. I think it's very interesting. That's
right. That's exactly right. Yeah, I saw this kind of full-time, face-to-face when I worked in the White House during the financial crisis in 2008, and that was an example of every single day I was on the Council of Economic Advisors. Almost every day we would get a phone call from someone in the economy that was complaining about some economic problem that they were facing. Eventually, all those became, calls from Wall Street and not being able to trade mortgage-backed securities. But the reason for all of this is that it almost always came out of some existing regulation or law that created this broken or captured market of some kind.
I'm curious if you feel as though the current conversations we're seeing in this day and age, the idea of using more energy almost has this negative connotation throughout at least a conversation with about half of the world right now. And as we sort of ramp up into this far more technologically advanced day and age, I think it's almost a necessity that we increase our energy usage. Um, but can we talk a little bit about how or what needs to happen to shift, I think, the global sentiment around using energy? Um, you do a lot of work, I think, in analyzing computer science and artificial intelligence, and everything is just going to continue to compound more and more. I'm curious first on just the energy usage. How do we get there?
Yeah, so I think let me discuss. That's a great question. Let me talk a little bit about at the macro level. At the macro level, we do know some facts, which is that individual energy usage is broadly correlated with measures of economic prosperity, and it's pretty obvious if you think about our society today versus where we started in caves in terms of energy usage. So in general, there's a correlation between those two macro variables, something like GDP per capita and energy usage, or you could say any other measure of well-being. Let me talk a little bit about the public versus private way to answer that question. So on the public side, I certainly don't believe that governments in any sense should mandate or even recommend what individuals should spend their energy on. That should be completely an individual decision. And so if one person wants to mine Bitcoin, they have that right. They should not be legislated or mandated otherwise. For the same reason that someone can choose to run their AC at a certain power in the summer or their heat in the winter, that's an individual decision, and they should pay a price for that, which is the price in the market. But beyond that, there really should not be any problem with anyone paying that price if they can afford it. So that's on the sort of the public analysis of energy usage. And then on the private side, taking the government out of it, should we as a society collectively encourage or discourage different forms of energy usage? I don't have a strong opinion on that. I would say it's up to our society to argue amongst ourselves and maybe persuade others about what is or is not a good use of energy. The way this impacts Bitcoin, for example, is a lot of people have been critical of Bitcoin because of its energy usage. I think it's important to remind everyone there's nothing in the Bitcoin protocol that requires fossil fuels. It does require energy, but really the only reason it's requiring fossil fuels is because our energy infrastructure today does rely heavily on fossil fuels. Bitcoin is completely agnostic to the energy source. So, I hear this all the time among people talking about, well, Bitcoin is bad for the environment. Really, that's not true. Bitcoin does require energy, and our current energy infrastructure relies on fossil fuels primarily. I don't see any problem with proof of work or other energy-intensive ways of validating the blockchain. I think the larger kind of question about clean energy is, among our society. That's a broader question. I can go there if you'd like, but I mean that's a little bit bigger question.
No, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, although maybe another time you and I will just have a beer and go down that path.
Yeah.
I realized I got so excited to start this conversation. I didn't even, get to set the stage or paint the picture of how did Bitcoin sort of come into your purview? When did you first sort of learn about it, and in what context were you paying attention to it?
So Q, this actually has to do with us. It came when I was a professor at GW at George Washington University. It was I can't remember the exact year you took my class, but I think it was a few years. My first year at GW when I was teaching financial accounting.
Yeah, I was spring of 2013.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So I think it was the year before, because I remember the class you were in, and we would move classes, and it was the year before when I had a student ask me about Bitcoin, and at the time it was, I think it was trading around $300, $400. It seemed expensive to me at the time, and he had actually, I had known about it beforehand. I had even read the white paper from my friends who were in they traveled in libertarian circles. They told me about it. I read the white paper in 2011, 2012. And even, actually, believe it or not, what I did at that time, I read about it, and then I kind of read the citations. I read about BitGold, that I read about Nick Szabo, who at some point in his career, he was associated with GW also. He was he was actually I think he got his, so he's a computer science by training, but he got his law degree at GW. And at the time, he still had an email at GW Law, and I looked him up in the directory, and he was listed as he had some kind of office at GW. So I went to the law school to find him, ask him about Bitcoin. I couldn't find him. They didn't have his office, and he didn't reply to an email, but it didn't bounce back. So that was when I first learned about the concept. And then I sort of, to be totally frank, I didn't really take it seriously for about 5 or 6 more years. I didn't at that point look into the code base. I just read the white paper, and I talked to my friends about it. It wasn't until I got to Texas in about 2017, 2018, when I really started to dig in, and then I realized, and really not until really the last year and a half, where I started actually really diving in and understanding what the protocol is doing and what it's not doing, and how profound some of the ideas are. So it's been a long haul for me, and so I've been in the space for a while, but I would say seriously in the space for the last 2 or 3 years.
I feel so much less bad knowing that you heard about it at the same time and also did absolutely nothing.
Good. Exactly right.
I'm curious though, because with your background, having worked in the White House during the 2008 financial crisis, and sort of seeing the white paper, and especially sort of having Bitcoin be described as the potential to be global money, when you had that period of you just sort of put it down and forgot it, were you just very skeptical on this? What was genuinely your initial reaction there of, is this a Ponzi scheme or something like that?
Yeah, I think I think the reason is that if you think about Bitcoin back then in 2011, it was still extremely radical and fringe, even much more so than today. I mean, it still is a radical idea, but back then, I think it really was pretty obscure. I mean, my friends, I had one friend who bought some Bitcoin off of Mt. Gox, and then I had another friend who bought some Bitcoin off of, he bought a bunch of Bitcoin from, it was a drug dealer. And so it was, no one was really trading it at the time, or didn't really know about it. And I think even the white paper, to be totally frank, now having read the Bitcoin code base, the white paper doesn't even really kind of do justice at some level to how deep the ideas are. So you can't, if all you read is the white paper, sometimes it's hard to know what is going on. And so it took me some time before I really had enough friends around me who were working on this and thinking about it, that I actually independently sort of wanted to investigate it. And so I do obviously I do think about those days because Bitcoin has always been I would say, I think what's happened since then is that the community around Bitcoin has grown tremendously, right? And the knowledge around what Bitcoin is has also grown tremendously from where we started in 2008. And so I don't even think I was able to connect the dots between sort of the failures in the financial system that I was working on daily in the White House to Bitcoin as a solution. I didn't back then think of it in those terms, and I guess I didn't realize how deep the problems are. So I'll give you one example. So when I left the White House, I knew in 2008 that the legacy financial system was broken. So that was very clear to me. And to me, what I saw were purely microeconomic problems. What I saw were that there were these investment banks that were totally separate from kind of their funding source, were able to gamble with other people's money. They were essentially taking privatized risks and socializing the losses. And it was leading to a huge amount of risk taking and a lot of essentially, you can say there's a lot of corruption. I don't know. I wouldn't say explicit corruption. It was just people were responding to their incentives, but those incentives were broken and they were very far from actual value creation in the economy. That was pretty clear to me in leaving the crisis leaving in 2008 out of the financial crisis. What I didn't understand until I would say even the last 2 years is sort of the links between those microeconomic problems in the legacy financial system and then the macroeconomic problems that arise from money printing. And those two problems are connected. It's actually a deep theoretical question of how exactly they're connected. But we all knew that the Fed printing all the money leading up to housing bubble fed the mortgage-backed security boom, but we didn't really connect the dots as well as until recently. And I think what's happened with Bitcoin since the pandemic, that knowledge about the essentially the problem with central banks with unlimited discretionary power has really become to the forefront. And to me, Bitcoin is the only solution that we have out there for that. I mean, well, there are other solutions, but I don't think those politically would ever work. There are other versions of these solutions.
Very well put. Very well said. I'm curious, what did you learn, or what was more validated as you went down the code and learned and read the code script of Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think the biggest is what Bitcoin is and is not. And I think right now what's happening is that most people in the broader crypto space, especially the ones that are coming in from the business side, they really have no idea what's going on, and they can't distinguish between Bitcoin and other coins. And even when it comes to any specific coin, they really don't know what the protocol does and doesn't do. And frankly, to be totally frank, I didn't either until I actually started reading the code. And that's just natural because there's a fixed cost of learning and there's this learning curve. But once you get there, I think you have a lot more appreciation and first knowledge about what Bitcoin is, and second appreciation for how it is implemented and how unique it is. I think it is really an amazing, one of the most amazing human achievements. I think that it's the fusion of these 10, really 5 big ideas together and implemented. And it was kind of done right it's like the iPhone. It was kind of like done right in version 1. And everything after that has been like small tweaks. But the big stuff, the mining incentive, the blockchain, the cryptography, those 3 big things were done right in the first swing at the bat. And it's really amazing. I mean, I think what I'm trying to do now here at Texas A&M is to get more people to be able to understand the code and read it. And I want to proposing a new class on Bitcoin, which will probably be in engineering, and get computer scientists to be able to understand it and have this be a part of their kind of general knowledge about computation, even if they don't become Bitcoin developers. I think it's something that very much our university systems need. The way engineering and computer science is taught here in the U.S. universities, you learn kind of very specific skills, like you learn about operating systems or programming languages or networking. But the truth is, Bitcoin is kind of cuts across all of them at once, and you never kind of work on a big project at once, which is what Bitcoin is. And that's something I think is that itself has huge educational value in our universities.
Beyond an introduction of Bitcoin courses, what would you like to see more of from the educational standpoint, from the universities, given the fact that there is so much educational content for many Bitcoiners who feel like to be self-sovereign, which is what Bitcoin promises, they have to sort of take ownership over their education of Bitcoin and go down these different rabbit holes on YouTube University, for example. Uh, what are you looking to accomplish from the university standpoint with Bitcoin education?
Yeah, that's a great question, Q. Yeah, I think I'll tell you. Actually, I have a lot to say about this. I wrote an essay about this called "Bitcoin in the Academy," which I'm hoping to publish at Bitcoin Magazine, as well as in a longer version in a more formal academic place. And Bitcoin is actually a great inspiration for how the academy needs to change. Now, the reason is that Bitcoin did not emerge out of the academy, right? It came from essentially from inside, from the deep corners of the market, from these on a cryptography mailing list. But it is different from most other innovations. I mean, it does have sort of an academic taste. It has a white paper, which is very similar to a research paper. It cites many other works, just like academic research does, and it has it builds off of 50 years of ideas, like a lot of research does as well. And the harsh truth is that no academic or scholar could have made or discovered Bitcoin because of the way universities are organized. We are organized in a very much a siloed, disciplinary, and departmental structure. So, and students are in the same way. You go to campus, you become a business major, or you study computer science, or you study psychology, or whatever it is. And the Bitcoin really is a fusion of multiple ideas at once that ties them together in very non-trivial and deep ways. It's not just stitched together in kind of at the surface level, but in a very deep way they are connected. And we don't do that in universities at all. We don't do that in any meaningful or deep way, because we're not structured that way. The history of education has never been that way. And I think education needs to change fundamentally for that reason, because we need to be able to produce innovations like Bitcoin in the future. So what I'm trying to do is an uphill battle, I will say, because the entire educational establishment has its own problems. This is one of them. And I'm trying to get universities to, and my university first and others down the line, to be able to operate in this more flexible and truly interdisciplinary way. I believe that anyone learning about Bitcoin can learn so many different skills, and so there's so much there. I mean, you could almost educate yourself entirely on computer science, economics, finance, applied mathematics, pure mathematics, all of it together just by studying Bitcoin. And so I think it's that broad and deep a topic. So that's why I think it's actually a great example for us in higher education to lean towards, and to reorganize ourselves so that we can make things like this happen more often in the future.
I love it, and I urge any students at Texas A&M who are listening to this, I assume you already are very well familiar with Professor Ray, because I don't understand why you would be here if you were not.
Yeah.
So I have a
Thank you.
Oh, Q, did I
No,
jump in?
please. No.
I was going to say, I know I mentioned this at the beginning, but I want to hear some deep dirt on Q. Like, I want to know, like, I have to imagine he was not the best student, or maybe there's some dichotomy where he's he was so smart. Like, you wrote the little the student performance reports where it's like, if only he would apply himself. I got a lot of those. Anyway, give us some dirt on your interactions with Q as a student.
Yeah. Well, Q was, he kind of was, I would say, maybe the pejorative way to say he was like the class clown. He was always the fun guy in the class. He would always hang out. I do remember he would always hang out afterwards with the pretty girls in the class, and they would always kind of congregate around him. He was the life of the party. I can't disclose his grades. I do have them in a spreadsheet somewhere, but I don't remember them. But I do remember he was a great person to have in class, because I loved his energy. I loved his good humor, and he really livened up what was ordinarily a pretty dry accounting class, to be frank. And so I don't know if you were into Bitcoin back then, or I don't, because we never certainly talked about it but so that never came up. I wish I had taught something about Bitcoin because, frankly, Bitcoin is partly it is an accounting technology. It's a brand new way of accounting for transactions, and there hasn't been an innovation in accounting since double entry bookkeeping. So this is a big step. So I had great memories of Q actually, and so I was thrilled when I found out that you were with Bitcoin Magazine. I thought that was awesome. I didn't expect the long hair, but
I will. I don't even know if you remember one of my good friends in that same class, Chris Brown. Like, you are still the only professor to this day we talk about. And I hit him up like weeks ago when we scheduled to have you join us. And I was, you will not believe who is coming on that I'm going to chat with. No,
amazing.
to be honest, I think I remember 3 professors from
Yeah.
college, and
Yeah.
Professor Ray, you were genuinely one of them. You made accounting fun and interesting.
Thank you. Thank
That
you,
is a
Q.
bold claim.
Dude, I know.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
not into Bitcoin then. I remember I was introduced to Bitcoin. I mean, I'll admit this. I was trying to literally get weed shipped to me in DC at the time. And so a friend was like, "Oh, Silk Road, but you need Bitcoin." And I had no curiosity or desire because I was so focused. Sophomore year was when I really was introduced to the financial markets far more in depth than I'd ever been. And I actually, like, I remember coming up to you at one point and asking you, "Hey, I have this internship at Wells Fargo and I kind of really fuck with it a little bit. Can I not show up to your class from time to time to stay the extra hour?" And like, honestly, worst decision. Looking back, like, terrible use of my time. The extra 1 hour did nothing, but it was a great experience because, like, I was so fascinated by financial markets, and it didn't help that there was a nice little bull market, and I was buying Tesla shares that semester, and I felt like a genius. And there's no reason a 20-year-old should ever feel like a genius investing in the stock market. Um,
Well, it's good to
I
hear that. Go ahead, man.
no,
Yeah.
please.
No, I was gonna say it's good to hear that you haven't changed too much. You definitely bring all of the positive characteristics that Professor Ray just described to this podcast as well. It is, as always, a pleasure to work with you.
Yeah. That's right.
Don't ever quote me on
Well,
that.
I'm
I'll
curious,
never admit it again.
Can you tell me what was your how did you tell me how did you get to Bitcoin Magazine? What was the path? Can we
So
talk about that for a second?
I got reintroduced to Bitcoin in 2017 at the end, like during that run up to 1920K. And my I'll dox myself like this. My good friend CK Snarks, who runs Bitcoin Magazine, we would, like, for as long as I can remember, like way back into college, we would have long conversations about investing, stocks, businesses we wanted to open. And we were just hanging out, and he brought up Bitcoin to me. And I genuinely, my first reaction was, "Oh yeah, I've heard of it. Like, that's that thing from Silk Road, right?" He's like, "Yeah, but like that's not really all it is." And for me, the thing that really stood out, that like it clicked, was the absolute digital scarcity.
Yeah.
To me, it just, oh, if you have fixed supply, and then I equated demand to adoption, it just, for me, that made so much sense. And then the best blessing that ever happened was, at that moment in time, I was still like getting paid minimum wage, working as an assistant at a Hollywood talent agency, and I had no money. And so I couldn't buy any Bitcoin. And if I had bought Bitcoin at that time and watched that crash, I I know myself well enough to, I think I would have been turned off. And so I paid attention to Bitcoin, like would read an article from time to time here or there. But it wasn't until then I got promoted about a year and a half later. And then I started making decent money and had some money to save, and went and slowly started accumulating at that point. And then COVID happened. I got laid off and went way deep into this rabbit hole that is Bitcoin and just broader investing. And somehow someone gave me a microphone and put me in front of a camera, and people like hearing my voice. I've never liked my own voice, so this is strange to me.
You do have a radio voice, Q. Actually, you do. I think that was why you were so successful as the class clown.
Fair.
No, I'm glad to hear that. I'm really glad to see your evolution here. I mean, that's a great it's a great story, and it's a I'm really proud of how you've come.
I appreciate that. I do want to, spend some time talking to you about, the research that you've done on, the future of work. When I was going down the rabbit hole of like some of your more recent papers, I started sending some to P, and I was like, P, you are going to like go nuts over this, because P spends every single argument or discussion that we have finding the incentives. And that's the basis of every argument he makes with me.
Right.
And so I feel like I'm about to get ganged up on here by just opening this can of worms, but I'd love if you could just share an overview on broad strokes of some of the research you've done on the future of work and
Yeah.
how our incentives are shifting.
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, that's a favorite topic of mine. I have my PhD really is in labor economics and game theory. And one trend that I've noticed this last decade, it's essentially it's continuing. It's not that sexy a trend. People don't really talk about it as much, but it's definitely happening, and it's essentially the digitization of work. And really, we've got the macro scale, 7.7 billion people. Billions of people are now coming online for the first time every day. And the internet is still expanding around the world, mobile access, mobile phones. And that has huge consequences for how labor markets and ultimately capital markets will evolve over time. We've run a bunch of experiments in this last 5 years of my research lab, where we look at productivity of American workers and American students against foreign workers and foreign students. And it's frankly scary. I will say it's scary because we don't realize how good we've had it here in the US for so long, where we're sort of protected from competition, global competition. And now technology is making that competition very apparent at both skilled labor and unskilled labor. And so essentially what's happening is the internet's spreading, and now labor markets are becoming much bigger because of the pandemic kind of essentially added rocket fuel to this transition towards working and being and finding the best labor and talent anywhere. And so now you really are competing in a much more broader scale. And what that means for skilled labor is that developers can now work from anywhere, and they you will be competing with an international pool of labor. And on the unskilled side, there's a huge amount of people coming online with who are not going to be consumers, as the internet has kind of evolved up till now. But really, they are, because they don't have any wealth at this moment. But what they do have is their labor, and so they're going to bring to the global labor market a huge amount of labor that will be essentially used and contributed to the global economy. And the signs of this are that there's a company. Let me give you one example of why this matters. For autonomous driving, right? Autonomous driving requires cars to be able to recognize roads on our existing infrastructure around the world. So you want to use AI to do that because you need to be able to process images very quickly. Now, vision-based AI is still in the early stages, and it can't always distinguish between what's a lamppost and what's a person. And so you need essentially that AI needs humans to identify a training set. And now the way that's done is those jobs, those really their tasks are outsourced to countries like in Southeast Asia, like the Philippines, where that can be done very cheaply and at scale. And in fact, there's a company called Scale that does this. They just they're now, they've shot up in value. They're about I think almost $8 billion. Their value from just a Y Combinator that came out a few years ago. And that's one example of how technology is harnessing human labor in new ways. Personally, I think that we need to have broader topic, I guess, or a separate conversation is more high skilled immigration here in the U.S. if we want to compete. These immigration quotas don't make any sense, and there's a huge amount of talent abroad that we should bring in, especially at the high skilled side, to help grow the new tech economy.
So I love that last point in particular, and I know you've written a recent paper discussing the necessity of high skilled immigration, but I'm actually more curious about just jurisdictional reach instead of immigration. Like, we live in a hyper digitized world. We're talking about digitizing global money to where our transactions will be immediate. We're having this conversation where all three of us, four if you include our producer, are in three different cities all around the country right now. Um, I'm curious, at what point will there be a breaking point? And I almost want to go at it from a game theory angle of, will there be a point where certain countries will incentivize businesses, not just with taxes, but now you can hire anyone anywhere and we will make it as seamless and easy as possible for you? Or like, how does that transition versus the necessity for people to physically be in a jurisdictional boundary to work and accomplish the work at hand?
Yeah, so let me reference my prior comment on regulatory competition. This is another area where I think it makes a lot of sense for countries to be competing with each other, and in some level they already are, for the best remote talent. One case study is a country like Dubai, which essentially, if you're a software developer, you can code in Dubai, not pay any U.S. taxes, get access to a huge amount of other co-working spaces and people, and live in some level a more tax-free and better life than you would here in the U.S., where we're still raising taxes left and right. So I think that kind of competition is actually going to be good for countries like the U.S. because it'll put some pressure, hopefully, on U.S. policymakers to recognize that their talent could walk out the door at any point. What's happened so far in the U.S. is we've seen post-pandemic, we've seen these tech hubs being essentially distributed across the U.S. So when everything used to be in San Francisco and New York and maybe Boston, now we've got more of that migration into Austin and Boise and so on. It stayed primarily in the U.S. Okay, so far things have been kind of within the U.S. and haven't had any migration outwards. But it's entirely possible that once once people are successful in dreaming up kind of a better society and a better country, that there will be a legitimate choice that people in the U.S. will have to, especially skilled talent, will have to be is, do I want to stay in the U.S. and pay this essentially the fiscal cost of living in the U.S. with high taxes, high inflation, and all these things that are not economic policies that are essentially breaking our economy, or do I want to move to a city state or a new kind of free economic zone like is being created right now in Roatan in Honduras, or kind of these outside of the different parts of the world, which are kind of sovereign nations unto themselves, and those are in the early stages. I think that progress in general is good all around because it provides competition for the U.S. To get their fiscal house in order, which is sorely needed.
So do you feel like, I don't disagree with you, but, and I think we're absolutely seeing that. I certainly,
But I disagree with you.
I'm about to qualify everything I'm going to say. Yeah. No. So as someone who within the U.S., I emigrated from San Francisco. I was in the startup ecosystem for many years, and then basically was like, "Fuck it. Why am I still living in San Francisco? This city is just." It was just garbage city. Everybody else that I knew had left. All the entrepreneurs that I knew had left, and so we moved to a state where taxes were much better. There's much more interesting things happening. It's one of these technical hubs that you mentioned, sort of, that are growing really rapidly.
Yeah.
And I see that happening in the U.S. But you mentioned the idea of U.S. citizens sort of emigrating outward to other countries, nations that are more economically, have stronger economic incentives. But one of the things that I detest about the United States as a U.S. citizen is that we have some of the most Orwellian laws when it comes to taxes if you move other places. So Not a lot of people know this, but the US, as I understand it, is one of 2 countries in the entire world that if you're a US citizen, if you have a US passport and you go and you live in another country and you work in that country, you still have to pay US taxes as if you were working within the US. And that's absurd to me, but that's the case. And then also there's the US exit tax, which as I understand it, it's like if you decide you're like, you know what, I'm going to renounce my US citizenship, I'm going to become a citizen of Honduras, then you have to pay capital gains, short-term, or maybe it's long-term, but capital gains on like 50% of all of your assets directly to the US government.
Right.
I guess what the question here is like 2 things. One, do you find that as insane and offensive as I do? And then 2, do you think that those policies will effectively kind of prevent people from emigrating even as the U.S. Continues to become a less hospitable place?
So I think, yeah, I mean, those are, I agree. Those are basically obscene taxes. I mean, taxes of that level are unusual, and they're very high. Here's how I predict this will play out. I mean, let's assume that our fiscal and monetary policies are not going to improve. Let's just assume that's true. I think the taxes that you just mentioned are going to deter older people with significant assets from actually moving, but it's not going to prevent the young people who are just starting out. And so I think what could happen, and I would say Puerto Rico is probably the first step in this direction, is that there will be other city-states and eventually sovereign countries that will figure out that they want to attract the cool kids out of the U.S. with no taxes or little taxes, and there'll have to be a little bit of a coordination effect where you'll have enough people who want from the U.S. who want to go, and they'll set up a better life, and that's I think how eventually this brain drain would occur. The tax argument will, I think, deter high income, high established, the more established populations in the U.S., but it's not going to deter the young. And that if I was running one of these countries, that's what I would do. I would try to go after the young.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, because if you're young, you don't have very many assets already. The taxes on you are not going to be substantial anyway. So why the fuck wouldn't you just bounce out of a sort of slowly imploding country?
Yeah, yeah. And you don't have legacy kind of relationships already well established in the U.S. So you can, if you get your cohort to go, you can all go together. Yeah.
And to your point, we're absolutely seeing that with regard to like Puerto Rico. Most of the a number of people that work within the Bitcoin magazine recently moved to Puerto Rico for that reason, because it is extremely tax advantageous.
That's right. And he just doxed everyone on the executive team. I want to point out, DB, that was P, not Q, who did this.
Dude, I can't believe you just said that. You literally just doxed everyone. I just said some people that work in our organization, and you were the one who named our CEO specifically and the exec team. Way to go, my friend.
You mean the CEO who posts on Twitter his
way to go
trees and farm in Puerto Rico?
Fair enough. So Q mentioned I was, as he said, I was extremely excited to talk to you when I learned about the fact that your main area of research into incentive structures and performance management. And I guess I'd love to talk more about that. I'm curious, kind of broadly speaking, what patterns you see in existing performance management structures, in some of the typical systems that are in place, versus like what actually is more effective. And this is sort of broader than Bitcoin. I'm just curious, like in the business world, what are you finding in your research?
Yeah. So the good news there is that the real world is beginning to move closer to what I would say is the optimal world that we study in economics and game theory. And in that optimal world, you have people who are essentially paid closer to their true value, rather than for other stupid reasons, like legacy, their legacy obligations or their legacy positions. And so, from an economic sense, we want to move towards pay for performance. And what's happened in the economy is technology has allowed for finer measurement of human performance and human work, and also better tools to contract on that work. So the traditional, 20 years ago, we had a huge amount of face-to-face work where people were paid basically fixed salaries with small bonuses, and they worked in these large hierarchies, large organizations. And now we've moved to a network model where people are individual contractors. They are paid fixed prices, or they negotiate contractor prices, and they're paid on output rather than input. And there's much less hierarchy, and there are more entrepreneurs. So that general trend moving, which is technology enabled, has been good for society and for labor markets. Bitcoin is part of that, honestly. I mean, one of the benefits of seamless digital payments is that it will allow for better contracting, so we can move away from more antiquated, the 9 to 5, just punching a clock, versus what did you actually perform and do for me now. So that big trend is actually in the right direction. I think there are some technical questions on how exactly Bitcoin will interface with this and so on, but I think in general, having digital payments will. I personally, I think that area is going to grow a lot, and that's going to be one of the big use cases of digital payments that we haven't seen yet, which is in just using something like Bitcoin inside of really novel relationships between not just employers and employees, but just people. And so instead of simply just allowing, right now we can allow for peer-to-peer payments where individuals can, you can pay your friends with, say, Bitcoin. But in the future, when payments are becoming very granular and automated through AI or through avatars, that's where having, I think, the foundation of Bitcoin would really help. The cryptographic foundation of limited the scarcity and so on. And I think that is going to be one of the futures of Bitcoin.
What are some of the most ridiculous, just like stories that you can regale us with from the world of incentive structure and performance management research? I'm thinking of what's the famous book? I don't think it's Measure What Matters, but talking about like OKRs, objective and key result systems for the audience. That's like a performance management system that places like Google became famous for sort of promoting. There's a story in there talking about the development of the Ford Pinto, where like they were just like, cut all the weight, cut all of it, we don't give a shit. And then of course that like drove people to have this like terribly designed system where there was like a bolt that like was like right in front of the gas can. And then if you got rear end from behind and you were driving a Ford Pinto, your whole car would explode. I'm curious if you can give us any stories like that you find funny or are funny within the incentive research community.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the punchline for all these stories are that people respond to incentives and they matter. There was a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. I don't remember his name. About 20 years ago, who was throwing too many interceptions, and so his coach fined him $30,000 for each interception that he threw in a game. And that quarterback that year became the most sacked quarterback in the history of the NFL.
Oh, that's so good.
So he just held the ball the whole time.
That's amazing.
Another one was a while ago. There was in Boston. The Boston subway. It's the
T.
The T, exactly right. The T. There was this big crash, and there's a big crash, killed the driver, and then a few people died. They did an investigation, and they said, "Well, why did this guy? What happened here?" And the answer was pensions. So it turned out that the driver of the T was on a defined benefit contribution plan, and his lifetime pension was based off of not just his final salary of the last year of his work, but really it was like the last month of his work, how much salary he was collecting that month. And so what he did was he went into extreme overtime that last month of work, to the point where he was driving his subway like 20 hours a day. He was so tired that he couldn't pay attention. He crashed the the tea, and everyone, and he died along with others. So another example of how incentives matter. Those are kind of funny examples. I think the ones that are a little bit more serious is our society still has massive incentive problems. I think the worst, frankly, are still in the legacy financial systems. To be honest, I think one of them right now is in venture capital. Right now, if you look at the funding of innovation, which is what venture capital does, and you look at, take an example is like, take the boom in the altcoins, right? Which essentially, the altcoins were funded very differently than the birth of Bitcoin. These are largely funded by VCs who are playing a marketing game with their limited partners, and it's no joke that they have an incentive to essentially, the VCs have access to huge amounts of institutional capital, and they pump money into these startups, and then essentially exit right before or after the IPO. Maybe it's a coin, maybe it's an IPO, and essentially the retail community, investor community, is holding the bag. And it's all, to me, I mean, as an academic, I can say this since I don't have my own skin in the game, but it's almost at a level of corruption that this exists to this day, where these highly centralized gatekeepers, these VCs, have enormous amounts of power and influence in the course of innovation, in terms of what products and technologies people work on and what they fund, what young people do for a living. Because the reality is that everyone follows incentives, and so individuals, I would say once a week, I would say I get an email from a student who wants to create a new cryptocurrency because they know that there's a reward for this in the market. They see what VCs are funding, and the VCs are simply, they're funding these projects. They're playing their pump and dump game, and they get a big return from their LPs, and they go on to the next thing. So it's not as funny a story. I think it's a real problem in our society, and we need, at some level, as the Bitcoin community, I think needs to call this out for what it is, because it does run against some of the ethos of our community here.
Yeah, I think that is a very an astute observation, but it's just it's absolutely true. As I mentioned, I was in startup land in the SF Bay area and helped build some of the early coding boot camps. And the company that I was part of, we had the dumb fucking idea, like, we're going to be profitable from day one, and we're going to work to, the only thing that we're going to care about is actually providing value to our customers. The product that we provide is going to be the best in the space. End of story, bar none. We did it. And when VCs were like, yeah, we want to throw a bunch of money your way, we were like, no, we're not going to do that, because we want to focus on producing high quality product, education. And that was a terrible mistake, because what they did is they just turned around, went to our shittier competitors, and just blasted like millions and millions of dollars, and turned one of our shittiest competitors into like the behemoth just by through marketing. And in retrospect, it was a terrible decision to focus on profitability. Like, that is not what any investor wants to see. And it just like screwed us over. What actually we should have done is we should have only cared about revenue, expanded massively, made terrible decisions for our customers, because that was what was going to look best on paper. And it was so demoralizing to realize, like, oh my God, this is just a terrible system.
Yeah, exactly right. That's right. Yeah, it's deeply flawed in multiple ways, and it's not exactly obvious how to clear it out. I think frankly, let me speak honestly, I think the real idiots in this game are the limited partners, like the institutional investors who have given the VCs all this capital and believed in their nonsense for so long. Like, as a society, I think we need to come down hard on the pension funds, the university endowments, all the people who are running these formal institutional capital, and because I think there's long-term problems with the way that capital is allocated here in the U.S., in the innovation world.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Well, I mean, as as a good Bitcoiner, a Bitcoin maximalist, I feel like I am compelled to say, or actually I'm suppressing the scream that I feel like I'm supposed to say, which is like, fix the money, fix the world, Bitcoin
Yeah.
fixes this. Um,
Yeah.
do you think that sound money will start to fix these incentive structures that we kind of are talking about and create these systems, right? Because it's not the individuals. That's another pattern I see, right? People love to demonize specific actors who all they're doing is following the incentive structures that are in place. You know, Charlie Munger said, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. It's a bit of a tangent, but my question to you is, do you think that something like Bitcoin, or in this case, Bitcoin, can actually start to fix these issues? Or do you feel like that's kind of a pipe dream and that we will see these types of broken incentive structures built in any new system regardless?
That is really the $1 trillion question, and it's something that I do think about a lot. Doesn't have an easy answer, so it's got multiple phases to it. Let me try to answer it this way. First of all, Bitcoin is, it has one additional benefit of that: we can just toss out the old system and rebuild a new. So that itself will have value, because you could say any human social science system over time gets corrupted and captured. Would this happen on Bitcoin? So the reality, so in this sense, I don't think it's given that Bitcoin would be immune 100% to some of the problems with the legacy financial system today, without some work, I think, from the Bitcoin community on our principles. And I think the principles are actually the principles are, to me, the most important part of Bitcoin are the principles, and it's the only technology that really has any principles. And I think it's important for us to consistently address, acknowledge, celebrate, and discuss those principles. Much more than I think it is to have conversations about what the price of Bitcoin is, which is where most of the conversation around Bitcoin is today. That's part of the reason why my lab, I focus a lot on educating students about the ideas behind Bitcoin. What were some of the design choices that went into this? Because in the future Bitcoin economy, there will also be future design choices that have to be made. And even if the foundation is strong, without knowledge of what those design choices were and the fundamental principles, you are at risk of creating another legacy financial system in the future. So that's why I think on the education side, it's very important for us to understand Bitcoin is much more than just a technology. It really is a new way of thinking, and we need to start advocating and explaining some of these principles of decentralization and sovereignty and individual rights and transparency that need to be embedded inside of the long-term future. I would say I'm not comfortable saying that without doing anything, that the Bitcoin economy will be completely perfect. So I think we need to work at it. Yeah. I mean, what is that? I'm curious about how you guys would think about this.
Honestly, I think you gave a fantastic answer. I think I love what you said about the focus in the Bitcoin lab that you've built.
Yeah.
I think Q kind of joked about it, but that is I say it like so often, it's almost like a bingo card item now. I'm just like, the incentives, it's all about the incentive structure. So
right, that's right.
I'm curious, as we wind down this, Professor Ray. Bitcoin doesn't always have the most positive sentiment around it. Like, there are some very passionate people who feel strongly against Bitcoin, especially those in academia. And I'm curious what conversations are like with some of your colleagues who may not necessarily see Bitcoin in the same way that you see it.
Yeah. I faced a lot of these conversations when I tried to run my conference. So I will say, first, among the universe of universities, Texas A&M as a university is probably would give Bitcoin as fair a shake as any university. There are other universities that are, I would say, actively hostile. My campus and my colleagues were a little bit, they were more neutral. They were like, well, why Bitcoin? Why not some other coin? Or who cares really? You know, why should we kind of go out and have a conference about this brand new technology? Why don't we just sit back and wait and let the market see if this has any value? That was more my experience from my local, my kind of colleagues here, is that they were a little less reluctant to plant a flag and take a position on Bitcoin specifically, or even crypto. Some of them were saying even the entire crypto space is too speculative. We're universities, we want to be a little bit more slow and deliberate and backward looking. Personally, I think that's a mistake. I think universities have to be forward looking, and we have to take a position, and we have to speak from a place of conviction. We have to figure out what we believe, right? Have a debate about that, and then we can explore different ideas based on those beliefs. Today, a lot of times what's happening in universities it's not really a place for free speech anymore. And if you've got a different set of beliefs, then you can suffer from that internally. So I think what happens in the academic community, specifically among economists, economists very generally are they're pretty agnostic. I would say it's ranging from hostile at worst to agnostic about Bitcoin. And really, I think a lot of this, they just don't really understand it, and they're not willing to address and understand it for what it is. I don't think it's an accident for me to say that no economist could have made Bitcoin. We just don't. Our training as in the economics field, we just don't have the to be totally frank, the skills or the knowledge to be able to actually take an idea and implement it in a real way. Economists are great at commenting on things that have already been that have happened in the past, or trying to offer some vague predictions about the future where they don't have any skin in the game. That's basically what economists do, both academic and professional economists. And so some of my colleagues, at around the U.S., when I was trying to get them to come speak at my conference and address Bitcoin, the best of them would say, we just don't know enough. I don't know enough about it, so I'm not going to speak. So that was like the best answer. And then the worst answers would be things like, well, I think, I don't know if I believe Bitcoin, but I believe in blockchain technology. Could be, you would get kind of some nonsense answers like that. So I think ultimately it's because the academic community, like I said earlier, they're not structured to be able to understand Bitcoin, and you have to kind of be a little bit of a maverick or a misfit, kind of as I've become, to be able to truly address what Bitcoin is intellectually in an honest way, because you have to be able to abandon exclusively relying on your own discipline and embrace multiple disciplines at once and try to see how they fit together, which is what I think Bitcoin does in a beautiful and amazing way. So I think it's still an ongoing battle. The battle that I plan to fight my career, my life, is to help educate others about Bitcoin and what it is and how it works. And over time, I think we have the right ideas on our side, and over time, we can convince the academic community that this is worthwhile and this is worth studying and this is worth understanding.
Absolutely. I mean, as you and your team continue to do work, I'm sure many other people, both at your university and others, will be looking to you guys as leaders in this space, in the academic realm especially. So thank you for continuing to just be, the coolest fucking professor out there. But there was one thing you kind of did that was always kind of uncool.
Let's hear it.
That, Professor Ray, was your daily pop quiz that was never really a pop quiz. So P and I did tell P the stories.
Yeah, you got to paint the picture for everyone.
So,
how does
for the audience, what Professor Ray used to do is, I kid you not, we had an hour and 15-minute lecture. The first hour, it would be, you would learn the topic at hand. And every single day, with the exception of 2 days, the entire semester, he would have in that final 15 minutes a pop quiz. So it was almost expected that you would have one.
Yeah.
And I mean, it got to be fun towards the end of the semester. Like, we would have some fun with it. but
Yeah.
I have gone ahead and prepared a pop quiz for you. So you
And
get to.
if you fail this pop quiz, you will lose tenure. Just to be clear.
Okay.
Some are very simple, like this
Yeah.
first one. The maximum number of Bitcoin are.
21 million.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Next question is the
Yes.
first country that adopted Bitcoin.
Okay. So I'm gonna guess. Okay. So I'm gonna tell you I don't know. I'm gonna guess it's El Salvador.
You are correct.
Oh, okay.
And to be fair,
Great.
the first country that adopted it as legal tender.
Yeah, I kept it vague just so that I could try to stump you a little bit there, but you picked
I was
up
wondering
on
if
that.
there's a trick question there, but okay, I got that one. Okay, let's keep going.
Which country has the largest share of network hash rate?
Okay, so I think at this point I would guess it's the U.S.
That is correct.
Yeah.
If you get this at this point, I'm gonna walk off camera. What is the current block height?
Oh, okay, that's hard. That is hard. Okay, let me guess. 700K, somewhere in the 700K.
You are very close.
Am I close?
Yeah. We just passed block 750K. We're at 750K4. 750K4.
Wow.
So we're right there.
Okay, I was in the ballpark. Yeah.
The final question, and I honestly didn't even like this question. The answer is not me, but who is your all-time favorite student?
Choose your next one very
hard.
carefully.
That is hard. I have to give you one name.
You can.
You can say whatever you want. I mean, as long as it's not.
I don't have one. I honestly don't have one. Yeah, I can't. It's like picking among your kids. It's hard to.
Spoken like a true politician, and I mean that in the worst possible way. Q, how did
as someone who has no children, let me tell you, that's the exact answer a parent gives when they have a favorite, and the kid who's not the favorite asks the question,
which means he
It's
answered
not
the
me.
question correctly.
He did.
That's right.
Professor Ray, you are so kind to gift us with your time today and your generosity to share all your answers. And thank you for all the work that you do. Could you let our audience know how they can know more about the work you guys are doing down at the university, as well as anything else that you are working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So first is what we do around Bitcoin is we do an annual conference around Bitcoin. It's every spring. It's usually the last Friday of April, and we have several panel discussions. It's through the Mays Innovation Research Center, which is what I direct. And so I'm happy to if anyone is interested, just message me on Twitter or on you can email me directly, Korok, Korok, at tamu.edu, Texas A&M University.edu. If you are ever in College Station, well, we can show you our Bitcoin lab. Our lab is run out of a nonprofit I created, the Southwest Innovation Research Lab. So you can go to southwestirl.org, and you'll see our lab, and we do monthly events around and meetups around Bitcoin. We bring students in, and we bring in speakers actually. And the last thing I'm doing is I'm trying to get a class approved on programming Bitcoin in the university this spring. And that one is I think we'll have to, that will be for Texas A&M students, but I want to make a version of that will be available online. So that one I'm actually in the process of preparing now. I spent a lot of my summer. It's a technical coding class around Bitcoin. The other class I like to teach is actually an accounting class, believe it or not, Q. An accounting class about transactions and value and how accounting started and how Bitcoin is like the major innovation in accounting. I think that would be interesting for a broader audience. And I would love to hear feedback from students and your audience on what kind of a class that would be successful. That's in the early stages.
Interesting. Absolutely. Yeah. We'll definitely stay in touch about that, and excited to see all the development that you're working on, Professor Ray.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and likewise, I'm glad you're doing this, Q. I mean, I'm really there's a lot of things you could do much worse than what you're doing now. So I think to be frank, when you met me back then, when I was a professor back then, I was more of a hard ass, so that's why the pop quizzes, and B, I was much more just conventional. I was just kind of like just a regular professor, and I kind of fell off the edge these last few years, and I realized there are serious problems with our society, our university system, our monetary system. There's some serious shit going on. I mean, in a way that if you don't say anything, you're sort of just almost agreeing to the nonsense. And now I'm much more attuned to that. And my future students now, I'm much more sympathetic to people who would have interest like you in this space. So I completely support and encourage any young person in the audience who is interested in Bitcoin and to learn that, it's a great thing. It's very different from anything else you've seen. Don't be afraid to kind of explore your interests and question all of I basically question everything you've learned about your entire life about the money and financial system, because the legacy financial system, I'm hoping, will come down in our lifetimes, and Bitcoin is the way it's going to happen.